As we all know, Paul McCartney of the Beatles died in 1966, shortly after the release of their seventh album in the UK, Revolver, which many regard as their greatest work. Eleanor Rigby, Here, There and Everywhere, Got to Get You Into My Life, Good Day Sunshine are some of Paul's classic songs from that album. Oh yes, and Yellow Submarine. Clearly the Beatles were on a roll. Fortunately, Paul had already written and recorded some of the songs that would feature on their next album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But then, the terrible and tragic car crash in which Paul McCartney died. But because of the popularity of the Beatles, particularly during the 1960s, which was a decade of political and civil unrest, the UK's military intelligence agency MI5 ordered that Paul's death should be kept secret and he should be replaced by a lookalike. We all know this. A lookalike was drafted in, some say whose name was William Campbell, others Bill Shepherd, and others still Billy Shears, who is of course called out in the first track on Sgt. Pepper. A bit of plastic surgery, we have our new Paul. And there's plenty of evidence. The remaining Beatles, perhaps through annoyance over the cover-up, gave us clues. Well, firstly, of course, the mention of Billy Shears in Sgt. Pepper. But then John's words, if you play Strawberry Fields backwards, I buried Paul. And then Revolution 9, which, played backwards, yields, Turn me on, dead man, turn me on. And then perhaps the most telling evidence from masses and masses of clues. The cover of Abbey Road, where if you look beyond the famous pedestrian crossing, you'll see a parked Volkswagen Beetle with a number plate ending 28IF, 28 if. Paul would have been 28 at the time, if he had lived. And LMW stands for Linda McCartney, Widow. And there's more. You can look it up on Wikipedia, where all of the factual knowledge of the world is stored and made available. I get it that some people find this all entirely implausible. They're the kind of people who believe that the Titanic sank because it hit an iceberg, and that Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman with a magic bullet. What is rather implausible, but in fact true, and an amazing stroke of luck, is that Faul, fake Paul, turned out to be a rather good musician, performer and songwriter. In fact, some would say that the real Paul had played himself out, and Faul took over at exactly the right moment. Some might suspect that George and Ringo could have been behind Faul's songwriting, but that's just a conspiracy theory. It's difficult to say which songs on Sgt. Pepper are Paul's before he died, and which are Faul's, but really, Faul's work was so good that it's hard to tell the difference. After Sgt. Pepper, Faul went on to spectacular success, artistically and commercially. Sometimes artistically and commercially, but without so much critical success. But that's in the nature of genius, and genius Faul most certainly was. I'm going to say that personally I love Faul's work just as much, and perhaps even more than Paul's. Going forward, we have Blackbird among his work on the White Album, Abbey Road and Let It Be, and then, when the Beatles' era was over, we have his solo album titled McCartney. Come on, calling himself just McCartney is a dead giveaway. Some of Faul's work from this time isn't so popular with everyone, but I love it. McCartney, Ram, Wildlife, Red Rose Speedway, and of course, Band on the Run. Apart from Wildlife, all of these albums reached platinum status somewhere in the world. Wildlife, only gold. I'd take that. Then we have Venus and Mars. I'm not personally so sure about that one, but I guess even Faul can have an off day. But still platinum, and platinum again for Wings at the Speed of Sound. Unfortunately, Faul's off days continued, in my view anyway. London Town and Back to the Egg were both certified platinum, but I don't listen to them. I think Faul realised that he was riding the wave of past success. So in 1980, in one last bash of creativity, he locked himself away in a farmhouse with some guitars, keyboards and drums and recorded McCartney 2 entirely by himself. Notice again, no Paul in the title. But that was his last shot. I like McCartney 2, it's quirky, unusual, and it shows some of that Faul magic from his early years. What happened next isn't known, well, known only to insiders, but I can reconstruct it from the evidence that's right there for us to hear. Faul quit. Either he quit, he was fired, or perhaps he died in another tragic car accident. Probably the latter, to make sure he wouldn't let the cat out of the bag. MI5, remember. And of course, since Faul's work was still popular with the public to a certain extent, there was a commercial imperative for the charade to continue. And so we have Faul Mark II. He probably deserves a proper name, but we'll have to make do with that. I'm going to say that as a lover of the Beatles, the original Paul and Faul, what I hear from Tug of War onwards is work of decent professional quality, that's all. There's none of the spectacular creativity of Paul or Faul, just bashing out more of the same. More of the same, but not as good. OK, so the Platinum Awards continued for a while, but from Flaming Pie in 1997, nothing better than gold. Kisses on the Bottom, just silver. Egypt Station and McCartney 3, bold attempt there, nothing, no award in any country. I rest my case. Paul McCartney died in 1966, Faul retired, or probably died, in 1980. Someone else is impersonating these musical geniuses of the past, and he isn't doing it very well. To close, I'm going to pick out a couple of things that prove that Faul McCartney was the truest and greatest genius here. 1. He invented heavy metal. Helter Skelter from 1968. 1968, the year that Black Sabbath was founded, and clearly their inspiration. 2. He invented Monty Python. Monty Python formed in 1969, 2 years later than Faul's TV movie Magical Mystery Tour. And if you don't believe me on that, just watch Magical Mystery Tour and you'll be convinced. Check out the scene, written by Faul of course, where John Lennon shovels a never-ending amount of spaghetti onto a restaurant customer's plate. Watch it without knowing the date and you'd say it's pure Monty Python, but it's from 2 years earlier than they formed. And so we have the charade, that there only ever was one Paul McCartney, all the way through from the Beatles to today. The half-truth that Paul died in 1966 and was replaced by Faul, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth that not only was Paul replaced in 1966, Faul was also replaced sometime around 1980. Ego, Requiem, Meam, Causa. See you soon.